Welcome to the Salt Strong Fishing Podcast. Salt Strong has been helping saltwater anglers catch more fish in less time for 10 years and is now the largest and most trusted saltwater fishing community in America. If you want to catch more saltwater fish, then keep listening. If you want to speed up your fish catching results even faster, then join the private insider community at saltstrong.com. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hey guys, Joe Simons here. Before we get into this podcast, I need your help. Many of you know that we have kept this podcast ad-free from day one, even though we've been approached many times, numerous times from different companies to pay us to advertise all their stuff in the podcast. And we've told every one of them no, and we will continue to say no. But I need your help with something. For us to keep doing it, we need your help. And all it takes is you subscribing to this podcast if you haven't already. So make sure, regardless if you're an Apple or Stitcher or wherever, make sure that you have hit subscribe. And then 2, leave a review. It helps us out tremendously. It makes all of this well worth it. And when Apple sees this podcast getting reviews and more subscribes, it puts it in front of more people and helps it grow organically. So please take just 1 minute and leave an awesome 5-star review, hopefully, and give a big old subscribe. And I will be forever grateful. Here is the show. The downfall of men. Hey everybody, Joe Simons, like diamonds, back again, Salt Strong Unchurched. We're here in 2025. I haven't had a guest on in quite some time. For those of you who are loyal listeners and never miss an episode of Unchurched, thank you. And thank you for all the love, all the support. I love getting the emails and the messages. I cherish every one of them. And on Sundays, I get quite a few every Sunday, and sometimes throughout the week. And I really do love the feedback, love some of the questions. Many of the episodes are questions I hear from people, and obviously everything is 100% confidential. This guest, so I do have a guest, as I've been kind of teasing that I haven't had a guest in a long time. Ben is one of our insider members and has been listening to Unchurched, went through something that I'm guessing that 99% of men have either gone through or will go through, or have a friend who has gone through. And I call it the downfall of men. And when I say that, I don't mean mankind, although it potentially could lead into that. But I think the downfall of men sometimes can be women and the easy access to women and all the things that are out there on the internet. And even in my C12 group, it's wild how many conversations, and this is a business meeting, right? We're there to talk about business and growing our business and making our companies a reflection of God and Jesus. And so many of the conversations turn to what we're going to talk about today, because it is a constant struggle with so many men. And I'll share one more quick story that my wife and I had talked about. And this was in the end of 2024, and there's this article, and it wasn't like on the New York Times or anything that reputable, but it was still pretty reputable. And it was talking about one of the fastest growing, I won't call it salary, but the way that women are making money in 2024 was OnlyFans. Okay. And if you don't know what OnlyFans is, congratulations. You are more of a saint than most people. But OnlyFans is essentially, I'll call it online stripping, and it even gets even worse than that. And, 30 years ago, you would be even 20 years ago, you would be embarrassed to say that you were a stripper or made money stripping. You would never, as a guy, bring a girl home that was a stripper. Like, that was unheard of. And now it's like the cool thing to do. And I'm not saying that for everyone, obviously, there's people that do have morals still, clearly, but we're talking about this is now a cool thing amongst young girls. And as someone who's got 2 young girls, one now a teenager, like, it was just gut-wrenching to even read that. And my wife quickly said, she's like, well, you realize you guys are the problem. And I was like, well, yeah. And she's like, well, think about it. If the guys weren't willing to pay for this and weren't so interested in seeing all these girls do this stuff, there would be no business. There would be no OnlyFans. And so that is 100% true. So wrapping it back up before I bring Ben on here. So Ben had reached out to me, and we were talking about some insider fishing stuff. He's been doing an awesome job. Is one of our kind of now part-time coaches and helping out our members in his area. And he had kind of mentioned his story about everything we're going to talk about, today, and with porn and all the things that the rabbit holes that happen on the internet these days. And he's like, man, I'd really love to share the story. I haven't heard this, which I'm really excited about. I know bits and pieces, but I haven't heard this full story. So, Ben, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, Joe. It's actually crazy that I'm on here because I think I've told you before that the whole reason I really came back to faith was because of Salt Strong, and then I started listening to y'all's podcast, and then I was like, well, what is this? And I saw Unchurched and clicked it, and then started hearing you talk about your faith and your struggles with it and everything, and even your struggles with anxiety, and I could relate a whole lot, and it brought me back.
I love that, dude. Well, that's why we're doing it. And I love how God works. And I've heard so many stories like that where it's someone who, either signed up for the Insider Club or they were listening to a fishing podcast and they just had it in their car on autoplay basically. And they were listening to fishing tips, and all of a sudden this unchurched thing comes on and they're like, I was about to turn it off. Like, what the heck's this? And then they're like, I ended up listening to it. And long story short, it came back to God or to church or whatever. And I was like, man, I love hearing stories like that. God is so cool.
Oh, yes.
Well, so yeah, kind of tell me the whole backstory. I don't, like I said, I don't know the full story yet, so I'll ask questions as we go, but kind of give us a background of where you were and kind of where you went and now where you are today.
Okay. Well, I'd really say the whole rabbit hole of porn really started, like most men, at least in my generation, it started during puberty, where I started getting curious about my own body, and then ended up finding porn and very quickly learned to hide it. And that didn't really help anything. And even though my parents would find out, it was just still look at it more, find more ways to get around them. And it spiraled very badly. And my parents ended up getting me some help with the pastor of our church. And for a while that did work. And then I'd say right around the age of 18, when I got out of the house, it just all came rushing back because I didn't really have my own belief. I just was relying on the belief of everybody else, and it didn't help at all. And as I got with my wife and everything, she didn't really seem to care too much as long as she didn't know I was doing it. So which didn't really help when it came time for recovery. But I'll actually shoot back to the very beginning real quick, because this is actually extremely important to the story. When I was 3 years old, my dad and my mother, sorry, I was about to get my words mixed up, divorced. And I didn't realize that had as much of an impact on me as it did. And I actually don't just believe, I know now that was a contributing factor to this addiction, as I guess I was due to the lack of having a mother figure or a strong woman role in my life. It was just, I guess porn was an escape for that in a way. And as soon as I got married to my wife, I didn't really care. It was just like, okay, she doesn't care. Let's just keep going with this. But it was every time, Joe, I looked at it, I felt deep shame and deep guilt, but it didn't stop me from doing it. Then flash forward to, let's say, me and my wife were dating for 5 years before we got married. When we got married, we very quickly had our first daughter, Rowan, who is now 2 years old. When she was born, nothing changed. But I think you saw the video, Joe, on the Insider community, because I posted it because it was just such a tremendous moment for me.
Yeah.
I held her up in the air and I was just making silly little noises at her, blowing raspberries, I think is what I was doing. And she laughed, belly laughed for the first time ever. And it was at her dad making just a small joke. But to me, it meant the world. And for the first time ever, I saw God's grace through my child's eyes and how she looked at me and thought the world of me. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing this right. I'm not the man that she thinks I am. And it hit very hard. And during that time, I did a whole lot of self-searching, figuring out where I was at. And I was like, okay, I can't do this. I need God. And I think during that time, your UNCHURCHED podcast, you were talking about the Once a Day Bible. And that was like, I was like, okay, I can start there. And I got the Once a Day Bible, started reading it. And as I started reading more, I was like, okay, we need to get back in church because I need a support system. And I got back in church, but I was still relapsing a whole lot. But it was different now. It was like I wanted to get out. It was no longer I was living in it. I wanted to get out. And all of a sudden, one Sunday, I see there's this thing called CR, which is Celebrate Recovery. And it's a recovery ministry for drug addicts, porn addicts. It really is for anybody. It's for hurts, habits, and hangups is their slogan.
That's good.
And I felt pulled by God to go there. And just the first night of going there, I was on the way there and I called my wife and I said, I don't really want to do this. And she told me straight up, that is exactly why you need to be there.
Wives always know best.
And I don't regret a minute of making that choice. It has changed me. I had a couple of relapses when I got into Celebrate Recovery, which is a weekly meeting. So you meet every week. At least for our church, it's at 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And they go over a 12-step program and everything. And it's really helpful. And at first I was very against it. I wasn't really wanting to learn anything. I just wanted help, but I didn't know what to do. And very quickly learned through that 12-step program how to just give it over to God. And now I'm 9 months clean, haven't looked at porn. I still struggle with the lustful thoughts, but it's now I've given it to God. He fights it for me.
Man, dude, that is awesome. So this is all still fairly new, meaning like in the last nine months.
Yes. And I'd say this is a battle that has been happening. Let's see. I know the exact age I was. I was 12 years old when I first found porn, battled it until 25 years old, 25 to 26.
And I assume, like most people and any addiction, it's a slippery slope, right? Where you start off with, I don't know if it was a magazine for you or now, you basically got porn in your pocket, right? Where it's a lot more accessible than it was 30 years ago. But you start off with, it could be an Instagram or whatever. And it's just this rabbit hole of all of a sudden, everything that you could possibly imagine. And then some is out there at your fingertips in your phone, in your pocket that you could see anywhere, it's nuts, right? It's not like when you were young and used to have to hide a Playboy magazine in your closet or underneath your bed. This is just, it's everywhere. And man, yeah. So is that kind of how it started? Where it was just a kind of innocent and then went aggressive and.
Yes, it started off with, like I said, just curiosity. And of course, having a mother who had Victoria's Secret model magazines around the house, that didn't really help. But I mean, even back then, websites that you would go to look at that stuff were almost inaccessible unless you were paying money, which limited it for a kid. But nowadays, it's free, it's out there, and it's even on social media websites if you know exactly what to search for.
Yep. And as Scott started the conversation off, it's celebrated now too. And You know,
Very
like,
sadly.
yeah, I mean, and not just the OnlyFans stuff, but I mean, porn stars and stuff are now getting featured at Super Bowls and like that used to be something that was way taboo. You'd never talk about it. It was embarrassing. And now these are like legit celebrities, not in my eyes, but in the eyes of just general society. It's almost like you're weird if you don't look at that. And you're weird if you're a young girl and you're not wearing a thong on the beach. It's just all this stuff that it's just flying in the eyes of godliness and what I believe we should be standing for. And I think you're right too on the family separation. Everything you said makes sense, right? That we've got more families separated ever before that are either missing a father figure or a mother figure, because it takes two to tango, right? It's mostly guys who are paying for this stuff and mostly girls that are kind of selling it. And yeah, I do believe that is one of the common denominators is this breakup of the family, and it could end up being the end of or the downfall of mankind in general, of just all morals going down the tubes. It is sad. So man, I want to say thank you and kudos to you for reaching out to me and being willing to share the story. I'd love to hear a little bit more on the program. Like what was that like?
It felt, I'll be honest, when I first went in there, it felt like I was in rehab for the first couple of meetings, because I was like, this just feels like we're all just talking about our problems and nothing's being solved. But as I actually really paid attention to the actual 12 steps, especially the first step being admit that there is a problem and that you can't solve it, that only God can.
Mm.
And that was, especially when I finally got over that hump of I like constantly relapsing, it was finally admitting to myself and to God that I can't do this, Lord. I need you to take over.
And then what were the other struggles as those steps went on?
Oh, we just completed one called the spiritual inventory, which is going through your entire life and taking an inventory on it, the good and the bad, and just processing even like the trauma, the good times. And it is very difficult to even just think back to those times. Like I had a very dark moment in my past that I ended up having to confess to my wife.
Mm.
And with all the love in the world, didn't say a word to me, just hugged me with open arms when I told her.
Man, that's when you know you got the right one.
Oh yeah.
Wow. And so did that help in general? Obviously, I'm sure that the bond there is not, I'm not going to say forever unbreakable, but I mean that this strengthens like crazy. I hope it's forever unbreakable. But what did that do on the porn side of things?
It made me realize that porn wasn't my problem. It was my solution. I was using it as a coping mechanism instead of like, it wasn't. That was one thing I learned about addiction that I've actually wanted to quote so much, is that your addiction isn't your problem. It's the solution to your problems. So you have to solve the root of the problem first, and then the coping mechanism will go with it.
That makes so much sense. So when you're there, how many other people are in this with you?
I believe we have 50 people attending right now at just our church. It's in a small little chapel room side of our church.
And then what percentage of them are kind of going through the same thing you are?
Right now, I know of one that actually really all of them have admitted that they all struggle. All the men at least have admitted they struggle with porn or lust of some kind, it's been crazy, because when I first went in there, I felt very alone. And it was how I knew I was in the right spot. Joe was one of the leaders. The first night I was there, when he came up and talked, said that he had recovered from porn addiction.
Man, Good person to have as your guide and coach.
Oh yeah.
So it sounds like you're still going through this then, like, how long does the whole recovery system and all these meetings last?
It's so it's hmm, it's 12 steps. We go through a different step each week. It usually, I think we complete because there's a couple extra steps included in some of those steps. So it takes a couple weeks to get through that specific step sometimes. I think we complete like half a year and then we start over and do half a year again. And it's the more I stay in it because I'm also wanting to volunteer after I complete the steps because I'm in step studies right now. So you have big groups, you have small groups, and you have step studies. And that's what I'm doing right now is the step studies.
Very cool. Besides the what you just shared about it not being the problem so much and having to kind of dig deeper, what were some other aha moments or things that you wish you had known?
There was one day I was in my kitchen and I was trying to figure out, I just had been very critical in my relationship with my wife, constantly judging her over things she was doing instead of having grace. And I realized my fault very quickly. And instead of asking, I guess I asked God straight up, I was like, why am I like this? And I heard him tell me, this is all you've ever known.
Mm.
And I realized all throughout my childhood that everything I was around was very critical of me. And I was extremely insecure. So to me, it was all I'd ever known. And it's just, especially going through the spiritual inventory, there's a lot of aha moments where you look back in your past and then you look back into your life now and you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense why I'm like this.
Yeah, that's powerful. What would you tell other men out there that are struggling, or maybe even wondering if they're struggling, but know that, hey, I probably got a problem with this?
I'd say, any lust, really, I mean, the Bible says it perfectly where even looking at a woman lustfully is considered adultery. But I'll say this isn't a battle that we can fight alone. This isn't something we can win alone. We have to have a support group. We have to have God to help us, most importantly. But it is very important to have a support group or even get into a recovery ministry.
Yeah, I think you nailed on the head. With any sort of addiction like that, it's, man, you got to have a support system. And I've shared even on the anxiety stuff, right? I was trying to hide that forever because I was embarrassed about it. Just like I'm sure it was not easy and probably somewhat embarrassing to have to go to anyone, whether you know them or not, and even talk about any form of addiction. It's never fun. You feel weak, but it's something. The minute it happens, it's like this just big old weight just is gone. It's lifted off, and you don't feel completely free yet, but you feel way freer. And then that just opens up the next door. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Man, so cool. What about a message? Because you're still fairly young in the big scheme of things. To some of these young guys, we've got some college guys that listen to this, and maybe even younger in high school. What would you share with them, knowing what you've been through?
I know they have it a whole lot harder than I did when I was younger. As I said, it was a whole lot more or a whole lot less inaccessible. I'd tell them, reduce your amount of time on social media for sure. And there's some algorithms out there on social media you can't fight. You just have to shut it off.
Yep. And I would add on top of it, going back to my college and even my very first job, where I was, all throughout my 20s, basically, there was a few people I could think of that were the ones that were always not just looking at that kind of stuff, but talking about it, almost flaunting it, and always talking inappropriately about women. And
Yeah.
every single one of them, like 100% of the ones I'm thinking of that were like the worst of the worst. And where I'm going with this is how to protect yourself. Every one of them got in a lot of trouble and were divorced in some form or fashion. And essentially just were not happy deep down. I hope they are now. I haven't kept in touch with a lot of them, but I can still vividly remember some of those moments. But here's the tough part: is a young man in your 20s. It was not cool to like talk talk back about that or talk bad to that person or say, hey man, you should probably stop talking like that about girls or stop sending that stuff, stop sending those emails. You're almost like the nerdy guy or the dork or whatever if you're kind of putting your foot down saying, hey man, that's just inappropriate. And so that was tough, and I did not do the best job in my 20s of kind of stopping that, even though I know deep down it wasn't right. But you nailed it, man. These young kids, these young boys today, they have it so much tougher, because even then, I'm talking 20 years ago for me when that was happening. Now it's a whole different ballgame. I said now it's kind of the cool, and now it's you're really really putting yourself out there. If you have the kind of the courage to stand up and say it's not right. So, but man, I now tracking these people 20 years later, 15 years later, I see the damage it's done to marriages, to friendships, to the relationships with kids. I mean, the one guy I'm thinking about particular, he had two daughters and they're not part of his life. And he was all in with porn and all kinds of other stuff. And so it's a shame. It can literally destroy families, and a whole lot worse. So.
Yes, it's sad because in the moment you're like, well, I feel good, but the further you get down that rabbit hole, the more destruction it causes.
Yep. I agree. What else, man? Any other tidbits or anything else to share on this? It's just so powerful, and I feel like this message needs to be talked about more and more, because it's one of those kind of silent killers, right? That meaning it's killing said relationships, love of spouses, and it really can tear relationships apart.
Like I said, even if for people who are not of faith, I really think just getting a support group is really the biggest thing. I think in America, we really have this radical individualism that says, well, I have to do this alone. And I think that's partially pride, but it takes a lot to really just humble yourself and really admit, okay, I have a problem. I can't solve this on my own. And I really think the biggest tidbit was, especially once I admitted that and came to God and was actively getting help, it was now I have to prepare to fight this again.
Mm-hmm.
Or like I was saying earlier, let God fight it. And that's where the armor of God comes in. And I think I'm not going to start going into that too much because I know we'd be here a whole nother hour, but I'd say it's very well worth looking into the armor of God and exactly what each piece protects.
And where could someone learn about this group that you're a part of? It sounds like they do it through a lot of different churches.
Sure. Yes, I believe it's a national ministry. You can look them up. It's called Celebrate Recovery. I believe if you just type that in Google, it should be one of the first results, and it should be Celebrate Recovery, freeing people from hurts, habits, and hangups. Or it's for everybody is their main slogan.
Cool. Yeah, I'd say if that is you, and I always pray before all these that we reach that right person, people, whatever it is. If that is you, yeah, get help. It really is it is so freeing to at least talk about it, and at least, like you said, step one, admit there's a problem, and regardless if it's porn or drugs or alcohol or whatever it might be, that is step number one. And you got to have God, you got to have a support group, or else it gets really, really tough. and so easy to get right back in the mix, as you've seen. It sounds like multiple times throughout your life.
Yes.
Cool, brother. Well, I want to thank you again for reaching out. I know it's never easy having to go on a public platform or anything like that and share, but I know this is super helpful, and it always seems to reach the right people, and it could even be, parents or grandparents who know they've got sons or grandsons dealing with it and just want to pass this along and say, hey, here's two normal guys talking about this stuff. You're not alone. Right. Because I think it's also what so many people need to hear. It's what I need to hear with anxiety or anything. It's what you need to hear when you went into that room for the first time. You're thinking, oh man, I'm the only person here. And the instructor happened to have the exact same thing. So you're definitely not alone.
Yes, sir.
Cool. Well, Ben, I appreciate it, my friend. And thank you again for sharing. If you guys have any comments, questions, hit me up. I can always pass them along to Ben. Joe@saltstrong.com is my personal email. Love getting all the feedback and love doing these Unchurched episodes every week. And I got a lot of fun and exciting things happening here in 2025. Love you guys, and I'll talk to you on the next episode.
Want more fishing tips, shortcuts, and tools so you can catch more fish per trip? Then head over to saltstrong.com now and join the movement. Tight lines, and thanks for listening.